morning. Testing again, testing. Good morning. Working. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming into our next big thing talk. I am Jennifer Riley. I'm from Design Interactive. We're headquartered right here in Orlando, Florida. Do a lot in the area of XR and training, so very excited to have you here for this session. I do want to make a small little logistical change. If anybody's willing to come into the middle, the open seats in the middle and at the tables, I hear the chairs are very comfortable. So if you want to join me in the center, I see some people moving. Awesome. Thank you. And before we get started, I want to move forward a little bit. Let's try to click over here, see if that works. There we are. So this is our session. One more. Nope, there was I'm going to leave it there, but there was a slide, I thought, to thank our sponsors. It's not there, but I want to take some time to thank them. Appreciate that. There it is. So sponsors on the screen, let's give them a little round of applause for helping us out today. Very exciting to have these sponsors. This session, I sat in on the next session. These sessions have been very engaging, very exciting. So we really appreciate the opportunity that they have given us to do these next big thing talks, okay? We have an exciting set of speakers here today to talk about beyond the hype, really the perspectives in using XR and the Metaverse for training. When I think about this topic, it actually takes me back to some work I did a number of years ago. It was about 2002, 2003, and we were doing some work at Fort Benning. And it was to evaluate the capacity to use collaborative virtual environments to train things like decision-making and situational awareness, complex cognitive skills. It was a relatively simple setup, back projection screen, but the squad, which was an active duty squad, they had trained together. They could communicate, they could shoot and move, kind of train as you fight. And it was pretty good, except that they kind of thought the setup was kind of hokey, right? So back projection screen in the cell, they did have an avatar, wasn't super heavy on the graphics as compared to some of their VR and the video games that they had done, but we were able to show them in playback of that setting clear breakdowns in communication, clear breakdowns in situational awareness, using objective data, clear breakdowns in protocol. And the first squad that came through kind of took it as a game, showed them the data, and then the squad leader asked me very politely to leave the room so that he could have a discussion. They had a very loud conversation, and after they came back, that sort of hokey game actually turned into training. So what was not very engaging for them initially, when we were able to show the kinds of integrated, communicative, collaborative training that could take place in that space, it turned into training. That was one of the experiences that I've had across the course of my career that really has demonstrated the power of synthetic training, what we can achieve with the Metaverse and XR. So we're excited to have your speakers here today. We have 4 groups or speaker groups. Daniel Robinson, we have Dr. Peter Squire, Major Johnson, and then Mr. Garza and Mr. Reese, who are going to talk to you about how we're bringing the Metaverse out of science fiction into reality, speaking about some challenges, but also the successes that they're seeing, clear successes that they're seeing in using these technologies and capacities across the military training. So I'm going to do the first introduction. It is Mr. Daniel Robinson. He's going to open us up today. He is founder and chief executive officer of Red 6, a revolutionary firm that is at the forefront of synthetic air combat training. Robinson hails from England and served in the Royal Air Force as a Tornado F3 pilot. After completing weapons instructor course, he was the equivalent, which is the equivalent of the UK US Air Force Weapons School. He's the first foreign national to fly the F-22 Raptor. He has an MBA from Georgetown University. He's an award-winning CEO, the 2015 UK CEO of the Year. He founded Red 6 in 2018, and they have revolutionized training with Carbon, their first outdoor synthetic training environment that enables within visual range maneuvering. Using a combination of AR and artificial intelligence, Carbon allows real pilots in real airplanes to visually fly against synthetic threats. Join me in welcoming Mr. Robinson to the stage.
Great, thanks. All right, you guys hear me? Okay? Yes, perfect. Awesome, well, thank you so much for the introduction. I was told I'm not allowed to talk about Red 6 today, but you did a great job of it, so thank you. That sets the stage for me, so I really appreciate that. I can't see the slides, so I'm gonna click this. There we go. Okay, you got my background, so you understand the context I'm coming at this from. I am the CEO and founder of Red6. However, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a warfighter, and it's something that I care about passionately, because when I was flying Raptors and flying Tornadoes, I couldn't get training. It sucked, and it's only gotten a whole bunch worse since then. So my job today is to kind of frame the overall view of why the metaverse, why XR, AR, VR, whatever you want to call it, why it's important to you, and then we've got some esteemed speakers that are going to come behind me and talk way more intelligently than I'm sure I am. But let's start by doing a poll. Show of hands, please. Who knows what the metaverse is? That's gutsy. I will cold call. Okay, that's good. So I would imagine, let's say there's 300 people in this room. I would imagine that of the 300 people in this room, if I asked any one of you to give a definition of what the metaverse is, we get 300 different answers. So I think it's important from a starting point that we give ourselves a common language to work from. I can tell you what the metaverse is not. The metaverse is not augmented reality, it is not virtual reality, it's not mixed reality. That is a means of consuming data inside the metaverse. But let's talk about architecturally from the metaverse. There are some key constituent parts that architecturally will make up a metaverse that I think we could probably all agree upon. It is a combination of hardware, software, compute, data, protocols, APIs, gateways, and assets which will be virtual and augmented in nature that we can manipulate the data from through consuming it in AR and VR. And if we can agree with that consensus, one key criteria of that data that is actionable is that the data has to be actionable. And it has to be actionable because the metaverse has to have utility. It has to do something, it has to provide a service. The general consensus of which I subscribe to is that the metaverse will become the world's next great labor platform. But for it to become the next great labor platform in the world, which I do believe will happen, it has to be ubiquitous in nature. And for it to be ubiquitous in nature, it means it has to be mobile, which means it has to come with us wherever we are. And so it's for this reason that I think the future of the metaverse lies inside of augmented reality, not virtual reality. Now, we can argue this in the bar all day long. I'm happy to do that offline. But today, I'm really going to focus on the advent of augmented reality. But because for it to come with us wherever we are, augmented reality is the technology that will underpin this. So let's give ourselves a common definition from which we can work from in terms of the metaverse. I think the metaverse is a ubiquitous layer of data and metadata that will come with us wherever we are. And it has to satisfy three criteria. It has to offer continuity of experience. Therefore, it has to be both synchronous and persistent to the real world. If we step inside of it or we come out of it, it has to make sense to us from that perspective. But I think critically, in terms of the data inside of the metaverse, the data inside of the metaverse has to be actionable. And if we action that data inside of the metaverse, it has to have consequences to both our digital lives and our real lives. If it does not, I would argue it's just a video game. Now, the first example I saw of this was actually by my co-founder, Glenn Snyder. Is Glenn in the audience today or not? He's not. Well, Glenn, co-founder of Red6, I do a lot of the talking. Glenn is the brains of the organization. And in 2015, Glenn took 2 race cars, put them on 2 separate racetracks in different locations. And actually, one was in the UK, one was in the US. He put real race car drivers into those cars and created a virtual reality world in which connected the drivers together, and they were able to race real race cars blind to the outside world. And when I saw that, I understood that not only was Glenn connecting them together in a digital world, but there were real-world ramifications of the actions and decisions they took in the digital world. You can ask Glenn, they crashed the cars a bunch of times. They were racing real cars around real tracks in VR. And when I saw that, I really started to understand what it was to be inside a metaverse and to have consequences in both realms. And that's a really critically important point because it got us thinking in 2017 about the utilization of the metaverse to transform military flight training. Now, I do not argue there are many constituent parts of the metaverse. No one individual company owns it. There's tons of places to play. We've all got a role to play inside the metaverse. I like big levers. And the biggest levers, as far as I can see, in terms of what we're doing with the military metaverse and training, is to tackle flight training. And the biggest lever of all is how we think about flying and interacting in airplanes. So I'm going to focus on that. Does this work? You should see 2 graphs up there. You guys see them? Okay, great. I'm going to summarize those graphs for you really quickly. It's a horrible story. We, as a United States and allied nations, are not ready to prevail in a peer conflict around the world. Now you can read that, but in essence, I'll summarize it is we're not ready because we can't retain people, we can't produce people, we can't train them effectively, and there's a dearth of capability in the combat air force right now, both at the tactical level and how we actually produce pilots through the training system. You can see if you read the graph to the right, expanding out to the future, we will never be able to solve that demand signal. The fundamentals of a massive demand signal and a chronic undersupply, to me, equals market opportunity. So what are we talking about here? To understand this, let's go back in time to Gulf War I. In 1991, the United States had 134 frontline combat squadrons. Average age of an airplane in Gulf War I was about 9.7 years old, and on average, pilots were getting 23 hours of training every single month. I can tell you when I hit the front line shortly before 9/11 in 2001, I was getting about 25 to 30 hours of flying training every month. We could only dream of that today. Since 91, so in 1991, we enjoyed absolutely supreme conventional overmatch of any peer adversary. In fact, a peer adversary didn't exist for us. But we enjoyed massive overmatch in terms of capability. Now, since that time, we have slowly but surely atrophied in capability. Fast forward to today, we've got 57 frontline combat squadrons right now. Average age of an airplane is a smidge under 29 years old. And guess what? Pilots on average are getting about 6.7 flying hours a month. And all of that is not blue air. A lot of that is red air as well. So it's a much more dire picture than that. I say all of that because we are incurring a tremendous amount of strategic risk. Whilst we've been doing that, two things have happened on the world stage. You've seen the reemergence of Russia onto the world stage as a state actor with nefarious intent, and we've seen that to terrible effect in Ukraine, although the reality of the rhetoric coming out of Russia in terms of its defense industrial base and the reality of it is fundamentally different. But let's not take our eye off the ball, and let's speak plainly. The peer threat to us is China, and let's be more specific, it's the CCP. And in China, we've seen a long-term geopolitical strategy aligned to a systematic mobilization of a defense industrial base. That has been facilitated by a smidge over 9% on average GDP growth year on year since 1989. And central to that mobilization of a defense industrial base is innovation. Now, innovation happens through a number of ways, through indigenous innovation, IP theft, foreign direct investment in our technologies and companies, espionage. It doesn't matter how it happens, but it's happening. Case in point, 2017, the Chinese J-20 arrived on the scene. In 2018, the PL-15 air-to-air missile, which is a direct threat to us and competes with advanced missiles on this side of the ocean. And I say all of that now because we accept that we are incurring strategic risk, and that strategic risk is getting greater and greater and greater. The question is, what do we do about it? So I'm going to be bold here and say the definition of insanity, ladies and gentlemen, is repeating the same things time after time and expecting different results. We are not going to solve the training crisis or production of pilots by smashing our heads against a brick wall and trying to do it with physical assets. We can't do it indigenously. We can't do it with red air private contractors. That's a temporary band-aid at best. It's not scalable, and it's not relevant. And although collaborative combat aircraft are really interesting, I'm going to talk about them here in a second, I don't believe that's a solution either. The solution, as per you can see on the graph, lies inside the LVC ecosystem. And I put it to you that it's actually in the metaverse and mixed reality that we'll find our salvation and our way out of the hole that we're in right now. So let's talk about the vision of what we are set out to do in my company. My vision was to create a joint augmented battle space in which all warfighters across all domains will eventually connect together in a joint synthetic training environment. That's our North Star. That's where we're headed to. But we're going to focus on the domain of air for now, because obviously it's the closest crocodile to our canoe, and it's what we know and love. Excuse me one second. Now, I'm not a genius, but when you look at that graph and you look at LVC, you start to see that LVC is inevitable, right? But the problem with LVC, as I looked at it, was LVC is a 50% solution. Why is it a 50% solution? Because it works in the beyond visual range environment only. But the moment that fighter pilots get to within visual range, the whole ecosystem collapses. Why is that? Because the moment I go from three-dimensional chess player looking down at my radar scope, etc., to looking out of the window, I'm putting the proverbial gum shield in and going for a fist fight, and I'm doing the visual maneuvering, the whole ecosystem collapses. Why is that? Because there's no way of synthetically putting synthetic entities into the field of view of the pilots and having them act and behave in a manner commensurate with real airplanes. Well, there is now, and that's the core technology that we set out to solve inside of Red 6. And we did that because I want to complete that LVC ecosystem. Because the LVC ecosystem at scale is the only way we are going to solve the training crisis of the future. Now, it's very easy to get wrapped around the axle of this is just a within visual range thing, and to do that is to miss the point. We can today take off in real airplanes, go up and fly against Chinese J-20s. We can do ACM with virtual wingmen, 2 virtual airplanes flying against us. Not only that, we can penetrate airspace and physically see surface-to-air missiles coming up at us. And historically, we've never been able to train to that. We can do that right now. It's all great training value. But to focus on the tactical level use cases of the technology is to fundamentally miss the point. And the point here is this technology not only works at the tactical within visual range piece, but it is the key enabling technology, the Metaverse, XR, whatever you want to call it, for the broader LVC ecosystem. And it's really important that we understand that. Let me talk about the Metaverse at large. Now, I said in the definition of the Metaverse earlier on in the conversation, it has to be persistent, synchronous with real life, and continuous in nature. Well, when I started thinking about that, one of the things I always lamented in terms of fast jet or combat training is we'll go to Nellis Air Force Base at Red Flag or ME Support's best training in the world. And we'll fly our combat missions day on day, and we'll go fly a mission, we'll land, we'll debrief that mission. That's not how we fight. When we fight, we go out on night 1 of the war and we exert effect, both kinetic and non-kinetic effect. We come down from that mission, we debrief the outcomes of that mission, and then we roll into day 2. And day 2 wave goes, but day 2 wave inherits the outcomes of night 1 of the war. And you probably know where I'm going with this right now. What the Metaverse allows us to do now is conduct what I refer to as campaign-level training. So if we can create a living, breathing world outside that gives us the benefits of flying real airplanes in a synthetic world, but we can have that world react to us, be it through AI or human input through white forces in terms of controlling the red air, then the idea of campaign-level training over multiple weeks allows us to do some really interesting theater-level campaigning. And we're able to connect decision makers from the tactical operator beyond the front line all the way up through the National Command Authority to the President himself. So you think about that in the context of the Metaverse, it starts to usher in some really transformational ways in terms we think about training. I did touch upon CCA, Collaborative Combat Aircraft, and I want to tip my hat to this technology because it's really interesting, I think really important to what we're doing in the future of certainly in terms of operations. It is inevitable that we'll be working in conjunction with CCA. However, I think it forms a smaller part of the overall training solution for how we think about the future of adversary aircraft. I say that because it's not scalable. It's going to be expensive to do it. We're not going to be wanting to fly them every week or every day, certainly, because in the same way we don't want to fly missiles every day, we don't want to be beating up our assets. So let's dig into what is CCA. What is a CCA, an unmanned aerial vehicle? Well, yes, it's a chunk of aluminum, it's a chunk of metal, it's a composite flying through the sky. It has a form factor, it has a kinetic and non-kinetic capability. I get that. There's many versions of it, and some great stuff out there. It's really important. But what is sitting at the heart of that? 2 things as far as I can tell. One is an AI algorithm that controls that entity, and the other is the UX UI that allows it to interact with manned cockpits. And those things are critically important for us to get right. And fundamental to working with AI from a manned perspective is understanding that it is predictable and allowing us to build trust in those AI algorithms so we know what it's going to do at any one point in time. That inevitably incurs a bunch of risk. Well, what's a great way to think about that risk and managing it and circumventing the problems of having to fly the assets every day? I go back to the Metaverse and the use of augmented reality in conjunction with CCA. So I'm going to put a concept up here that I think is the future of how we will inevitably train. And I'm going to span from LVC to LVC3A. But if we start pulling this apart, live, virtual, constructive, collaborative combat aircraft, I think that mixed solution is how we think about the future of adversary training, LVC3A. But start pulling that apart. And even if I concede the point that live flying, there will be an element of live flying in terms of provisions of adversaries later as we go through the next 10 years, which I don't think it's actually going to be necessary at all, but I'll concede the point for now. VC and the collaborative combat aircraft, as I've alluded to, all of them are dependent on the ability to use XR and AR in the context of an LVC Metaverse type scenario. We have to be connected together. We have to be able to visualize it. In the future, I see that L there. The future I see is an L where the only air sorties we're flying is blue air. And I don't think it's as far away as people realize. That's what this technology can usher in. I would like a show of hands again, if I may. Who in the audience considers themselves to be innovators? Just one person at the back who works for me. Okay, great. Just one person. Okay, who thinks they are early adopters of technology? Okay, more. Okay, this is about right. So in 1962, Professor Everett Rogers wrote something called the diffusion of innovation theory. And the diffusion of innovation theory states that across a standard distribution or normal distribution, 2.5% of people in this audience will be innovators. Right. It also goes on to say that about 13.5% will be early adopters of the technology. Those are the people that stand in the rain to get an iPhone a week before anyone else. Unfortunately for me, 68% of this audience think I'm full of it right now. And that's normal. That's the frozen middle, right? That's what we're talking about. And it's the normal course of any technology when it comes into service and you're just trying to disrupt. It also tells us that I have about 10% of this audience bought into what I'm talking about right now. You guys believe me. And the tipping point for the adoption of technology in any industry sits at around 15 to 18%. So it became readily apparent to me in the early life cycle of Red 6 that actually we need to make that 8% believe. And as I started thinking about that in the grand tactical context of flying training, it became readily apparent to me that this technology has a massive role to play in the production of pilots. All the way down the training pipeline from day one, walking through the door, how do we fly patterns around airfields, all the way through formation flying, BFM, air combat maneuvering, air-to-air refueling. There is a massive application for this technology to transform the pilot production pipeline, if we are innovative. But to be innovative, guys, one of the things I've learned over the last 5 years leading this company is we are heavily dependent on internal evangelists. Internal evangelists, you're all our stakeholders, right? I'm gonna assume that you're here listening to this because you like XR and AR and the metaverse and you believe there's a future in it. But we collectively have to be internal evangelists in whichever organizations we are privy to, be it the Air Force, the Navy, OEMs, industry at large. It is essential. And you can make a difference. We collectively can make a difference. I'd like to point out two specific examples of this that come from the most unlikely of sources. Yesterday, you may have seen the announcement that we made a deal with BAE Systems to integrate this technology into Hawk. That's a big deal for us. BAE pulled that together inside a year. But I want to make a special thanks and a special nod to the team of Boeing. Are there any Boeing people in here at all? Not one. Awesome. They're not getting any praise. So Boeing went from 0 to 6 months of coming to fly our technology, and because of 3 or 4 people inside that organization, drove that forward at such a furious pace that last week we signed a contract with Boeing to start integration into AT4 ahead of T7. It can happen that quickly. Internal evangelists sit in amongst us. You guys are really important to the success and adoption of this technology. I'm going to show you a video here in a second. Boeing gets it, I believe. Is there a video, Georgie? Have we got sound on the video, guys? This is way better with sound. Sound people at the back? I imagine there's a really cool soundtrack. There we go.
Okay, Bravo's visual, we're starting to fly. Heading about 200. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
we think that's a vision of the future and how we will train and prepare for the next big fight. I will leave you guys with these statistics. This technology at scale adopted across the US Air Force will save us $13 billion a year, 140,000 unnecessary flight hours, and about 140 million pounds of CO2 pumped into the atmosphere. It also has the ability to fundamentally transform the training pipeline and actually quantifiably usher in a new paradigm in how we think about training. I will leave you with one final thought. The definition of insanity is to repeat the same mistakes and expect different results. So to the United States Air Force, United States Navy, my beloved Royal Air Force, ATC, ACC, I implore you to wake up and understand what this technology can do for you. LVC is the future, the military metaverse is the future, and XR and AR are a critical technology to enabling that. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Slight mic problem. We'll move ahead with it in the hand. Let's give Dan another round of applause. I want to thank him for opening us up with that motivating speech, and to let us, remind us that a lot of times we think the metaverse is about immersion, increasing immersion, but it's about more than that. It's about interaction, persistent and effective interfacing. It's about adaptive, effective training through personalization, adaptation, and we can achieve those things. And it's to get ultimately to maximized operational impact, which is why I'm so excited to invite our next speaker, Major Jesse W. Johnson, the commander of Detachment 23, Advanced Force Development Technologies, Joint Base San Antonio, Kelly, Texas. In his role, he is responsible for overseeing the modernization of Air Force training through the integration of adaptable learning methods and technology to develop the airmen we need. Additionally, Major Johnson leverages force development efforts and initiatives to create on-command, on-demand training and analysis delivered digitally 24/7 access. Major Johnson holds a master's degree in organizational management and a doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University. He's a dynamic speaker. I welcome him to the stage, Major Johnson.
Boy, how do you follow an intelligent person with a British accent and sound smart? I'll tell you, that was something else. In Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, Secretary Rumsfeld was once asked about the condition of our equipment, and he answered the question with a statement that's becoming more and more profound, which was, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army that you want. And I'm going to pile on to Dan's presentation a little bit and talk a little bit about that strategic gap, but I'm going to pull a different angle from it. My team and I work to look at what the future of education and training and what it is we're going to do, but we have to go backwards and look at why it's important. And so what I want to show you today, and I want to take you back to probably your high school or early college education, where you may have gone through a biology class, and talk a little bit about how our brains develop and what it is that we're learning in the process of our growth and development. And so I'll show you top left corner there, the development of cells and neurons that create the neural pathways that store our memory. This is really the basic structure of how we learn. And from embryo to roughly the age 4, it's just building that brain matter. And it's massive amounts of synapses development, billions and billions of synapses connections being developed. And all of our relationship to the world is through our 5 senses and our primary caregivers. All of our memories are connected to that. But when we hit age 4, things start to change a little bit. And we start to pare those down, and our brain is pruning out, and it's a use it or lose it method. Of those billions and billions of connections that we use, there's only certain ones that we use a lot, and there are a few that we don't use at all, and our brain wants to eliminate those. And so we're going through this process of synapses development, and it kind of teaches our learning method, and it becomes how we learn and who we are as learners in our early development. And then we go through this strange phase at 11 for females and 12 for males, where we're building the second portion of our prefrontal cortex. And this is where we build and develop our logic and emotion. The critical point to this is when we hit 18, we start going through that synapses pruning thing. And from 18 to 25, we're whittling that back down. And this is where all the things that we learned in that first phase of brain development become part of our personality. It's really who we are and how we learn. There's a really interesting thing that we need to pay attention to as we look at this in terms of XR technology and the metaverse. And if you're tracking the timeline there on the bottom, you can see in 2021, we were really looking at the 18-year-olds because that's our U.S. military's primary recruiting age is 18 to 25. We wanted to understand what happened in the 18-year-olds world in 2021, what happened in their early childhood development and in their growth. And it's something very, very significant. And it piles greatly on top of Dan's strategic gap, because not only are we facing a crisis of retention right now, we're going to have a crisis in development in the future. Because if you look at that, that 18-year-old in 2021, and back that up to that 4-year-old point where their brain made the transition and started going into learning development mode, we dropped that down in simple math in public, 2007. And without looking at the slide, although it's huge and in your face, can anybody guess what happened in 2007 that changed the fabric of our society? The iPhone. So the iPhone, a lot of people think it's a simple technology, right? We just went from flip phones to iPhones and it's all cool and now we have this thing in our pocket, but it did something really unique that changed everything about how we view everything. And it switched our delivery of content from centralized and bundled, meaning the instructor or a supreme entity or intellect was the smartest entity in the room. And now we've changed that to our smart device is now the smartest entity in the room. That changes everything about how we train. But we didn't do it. We didn't track along with that. Excuse me. So if you were to map a technology timeline along this same timeline, you would see from 1978 to roughly 2007, a fairly static and consistent rise in technology development. From 2007 to 2014, you would see a rapid improvement in technology development that is greater than the sum of 1978 to 2007. So in that 7-year gap, we made a huge change. We also know, back to our 18-year-old from 2021 who was 4 in 2007, they started their education journey. And in their education journey, we were ramping up technology in that classroom. We were using technology to present information in different ways. And people were learning very, very differently. And they started to build those synapses connections and prune those synapses connections in a way that most of us in this room don't. Their ability to access information is drastically different than ours. And so we have to start paying attention to what it is that helps them learn. How do they learn and what brings information to them? And what we find is we'll take them out of this K through 12 experience where they went through this entire process and they've had this digitally immersive environment because, let's be clear what we're saying, the 18-year-old in 2021 was the first ever complete digital native, meaning that they had digital access to every bit of their K through 12 curriculum 24/7 all the time. Then we brought them into our workforce, and the first thing we did was take all of that away. And we tried to train them with 1950s education and training methodology, and it simply isn't going to work anymore. In the early part of 2020, my team and I sat down and studied this, and we predicted that there would be a recruiting problem in 2022. This is why. Because people don't learn the same way they learned before. And as those recruits came into the Air Force in 2021, they're calling their buddies, going, hey, the Air Force doesn't match the commercial. And we think that's a problem. We think it's actually a huge problem. We're going to see a retention issue in 2026 that's going to mirror the pilot retention problems that we're seeing on the other side. So we're greatly concerned about this. So we wanted to dig a little bit deeper and go, what happened? Because inside of all of that stuff, as technology is growing, there's also policy that's growing alongside of it. And if you look back to the slide, you'll see on the bottom layer, we have sort of these milestones in policy. But if you'll notice, there's nothing really talking about development of technology in the classroom. There's no computer science training. And that's scary to us. When we start thinking about the workforce that we are going to need in the future, it's not the kinetic workforce we have of the past. And if I pile on again to Dan's presentation, they're simply not going to function the way that we function. They're going to view the world completely differently. So we start challenging or questioning some of the policy perspectives that we've had and wondering what's going on. And if you look at the far left there, you see 50% of our schools, let me get this right. Yeah, so you see only 50% of our schools have classes on computer science. Roughly 20 states require some sort of class in computer science by the time they graduate, and only 3 states have a mandatory class or mandatory courseware in computer science. So we're not grooming, we're not training, and we're not teaching people to develop these new technologies, which basically equates to our society is a consumer of technology. We're failing in the K through 12 experience to provide the baseline education to continue the development of technology. That's of great concern. Because if I go to my next slide, and I talk a little bit about how the Chinese Communist Party is approaching this, it's a little bit different. So they produce policy, again, there's no difference in the way their brains develop and the way our brains develop. They live the exact same experience that we did, the same modular and mobile technology shift that we experienced, they experienced. But in 2017, they made a policy. They established a policy in their K through 12 system that says that everybody's going to start learning. Anybody have oh, sorry, I'm supposed to click the slide. Anybody have a guess at the earliest age that the Chinese Communist Party starts pushing education in artificial intelligence? Any guess? Very close, 6 years old. So while we're not training computer science at all until the high school years, the Chinese Communist Party is pushing policy to train computer science, not just computer science, but I'm sure you're all familiar, AI is advanced computer science. They're teaching that in first grade. And it gets progressively stronger as they go. And right now, 100% of people who graduate high school in China have a background in computer science and AI. Now compare those workforces and compare that military opportunity to our military opportunity and ask yourself, was Dan right about the strategic threat? But here's the conundrum that we're in. Here's the trick we're in. So if you're strategists like me, you know and understand. In the next conflict, the first thing that our adversaries are going to want to do is deny that access to information. They know this too. This is no secret. Everything I'm showing you is public information. The first thing they're going to want to do is deny access to information. So the trick is not, can you develop XR training to augment the operational mission? The trick is, can you develop training, an augmented XR training, that can create a person who is so competent that at the point of impact or the point of conflict, they no longer need the technology. That's the value. So while I think that we're behind, and let me just caveat, a lot of this is my personal research and doesn't always reflect the opinions of others in the Air Force, so let me just say that first. But while, excuse me, one second. While we're developing massive amounts of content or massive amounts of capability, we have to be aware that at some point we're going to need to go downrange, and we're going to have to do our mission without that capability and without that technology, at least for a small time, at least for a small period. It makes a great concerning argument for the future of our warfare, because a lot of times if you go out on that floor, what we're focused on is technology at the point of impact, when we need to be ahead of the point of impact. We need to back up our requirements for training and technology so that we create more competent service members, more competent airmen. And back to Donald Rumsfeld's comment, why it's so important, is we need to start thinking about the airmen that we need at the point of conflict and build that army now, because you go to war with the army that you have, not the army that you want. So what is it that we do in conferences like ITSEC? We pursue those technologies. We make those partnerships and relationships, but we need to always understand that there's a real valuable reason why. And we're at such a unique point in history on how we're doing training and how our young children learn and how we're shifting that mechanism over to this new methodology, XR, AR-capable training. It's a difficult challenge to solve. But it has to be deliberate. So the question is, do we ask our representatives up on the Hill to give us $900 billion to buy a fleet of training aircraft that we then have to service and maintain and develop and keep out of the rain and all those sorts of things? Or do we ask them for $100 billion to build an XR environment or a metaverse for training that allows us to buy a B-1 one time and distribute it to 100,000 airmen overnight? Or do we buy an entire fleet of the entire Air Force fleet or DoD fleet of ships and aircraft and distribute it 100 million times? The great value in XR training is that we can overcome that education and training policy gap over the last 20 years with technology and innovation, because we can scale it faster and better. I thank you for your time today, and I'll hand it back over to Dr. Riley.
Another round of applause for Major Johnson. Thank you so much, sir. If you don't know, he's out to change the Air Force. Just try to stop him. Okay. So thank you for that. You know, the talk about where we're going operationally, how we're going to close the gaps, these are really critical to how we succeed. And we're going to go into now some examples of how we're seeing that happen. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Peter Squire. He's a program officer at the Office of Naval Research. He works in the Warfighter Performance Department, where he oversees basic and applied research as well as advanced technology development projects related to human performance, training, and decision aids, and supporting the Marine Corps with a focus on infantry, small unit decision making. He previously worked as a computer scientist and human factors engineer at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia. Dr. Squire received his PhD in human factors and applied cognition from George Mason University, Fairfax, Virginia. He's going to come up and talk to you about some successes, and he has a huge amount of experience in making sure that we can apply these technologies appropriately, effectively, adaptively, so that we actually improve human performance. Dr. Squire?
I'm not going to jump.
You're coming up?
Yeah, I'm coming up. Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Good. I'm generally a loud person, so I have to kind of modulate here with the mic. I'm excited to tell you a bit about the journey that I've been on when I came on as a program officer back in the 2010 and 11 perspective. I set this up from the context, particularly from XR technologies, in the sense that the tasks, domains, the applications, and again, all of those things that would need to go into the metaverse matter. What I want to share with you today as part of my journey is what that looks like from an infantry ground perspective and why that's important and how you can use it, I think, to be thinking about the contexts for where we're looking at to either evangelize, talk about, message, and how we go out to utilize this technology, particularly in the context of training. Because I think there's a lot of different opportunities and applications for how we continue to test and build. But I'll start out with the story of how I was first sort of exposed to the use of, in particular this case, augmented reality within the context of the Marine Corps. So on the Marine Corps side, all Marines and infantry, right, and particularly love to have things go boom, right? You go out there to arrange, to be able to see something drop bombs, to be able to experience that, to know that you've had an effect, and to see that. Part of the challenge, though, within that context, is that environment is some days you go out there and there may not be an aircraft available to be able to support you to do that training exercise for that day, whether it's maintenance, whether it's weather, whatever the case may be, that will impede upon your ability to actually conduct the training. So who thinks or has an idea of what you would do, short of having something actually be out there to be dropped down? So typically instructors will magic finger it and say, just think over here in this area that there's an actual explosion, or they'll go bang, bang, right? As part of the experience for being able to correct, right, and go through still that skills and opportunities. Right? So as part of this, when I stepped into the program officer role, one of the first things that I saw was the technology that we were providing to be able to do augmented reality, right, for infantry focused specifically on close air support in service of the Joint Terminal Attack Controller, right? Particular, what this meant was they were now looking down the range, and we have the capability to then overlay those effects. So instead of the magic fingers and the sound effects coming, you can now actually look out and see what was going and occurring on the real range, on the real environment, and more importantly, it didn't always have to be in that specific context. So now, with augmented reality and other types of technologies, you can shift that. You can do kind of at any time, right, any place, use of that technology to train the skills that you want in a specific way, given the context and task that you're looking to prepare for. And this is important because one of the things that I'm constantly looking for as a program officer when we're testing some of these are the behavioral realism, right? How do I know this is having an effect outside of just a training outcome that I'm looking at if they are immersed or buying into it? And some of the key things that I look at isn't actually when they're having the headsets on, is when we're doing demos and you'll put up a display and you have everybody watching the display and they're looking at a real, real environment, and then we insert a virtual entity on top of it, right? And so they all see that entity on top of the real environment, but they can't help themselves. I can't help myself sometimes because you see an effect go down and then you quickly look over, right, to the real world to see, you know, what just happened. And then you remember, oh, it's an illusion to an extent that we're inserting that on top of it. But I continue to look for those things. How do we create those opportunities of where it's becoming so realistic that we're seeing that as part of it? And I do that as an understanding that we're going down the right path, because part of it is we can show and showcase, again, sort of the realism out and the effects from what you see from the visualizations, while also times we're improving. You know, we've gone from a backpack that looked like Ghostbusters, right, having to walk around with that and more pixelated things, to now with like the emergence of virtual reality entertainment centers like the Void, being able to provide that in a very COTS-based solution. So I use that as the starting point and use case to talk about one particular item of where we've had some success, but more important of, like, again, the domain and task matter, the context matter, and it's important because different training opportunities come up. And part of the benefit I see from XR is a lot of components go into, right, the Metaverse XR that you can break apart and use as different parts of our military training pipeline. So everybody may be focused just on where I'm going to use that XR, right, technology in one situation, but if you think about all those fundamental components again, from what you need to be able to create the environment, how you utilize it, there's different opportunities that you can see along this kind of general breakdown from initial just computer-based training to actually being able to do it on a desktop, to being able to do it right on a projector screen, to being able to do it outside in the real world, to being able to do it as part of actually a live environment interacting right across. It's not just one avenue that we're thinking about those applications. We've been having some discussions sort of around this as well, that if you think purely of just how you put it as a system in totality, you're missing some of the core components that I see coming out of XR, right? You've built that environment. How else can you use and distribute that across the different types of training applications you have? Not just to help only facilitate, right, in our case, like augmented reality. We've taken a lot of those technologies and enablers and being able to provide that back also to virtual reality, but also to be able to provide it back where there's a benefit on desktop training. You can use all of those in different ways depending on the tasks and outcomes and skills that you're looking to do. And sometimes it's very hard to miss that perspective because you're looking at the specific widget and thing of how do I use this rather than the person and saying, what training do they need to achieve today? And how do I best facilitate it given what I have now, but also where I can be going in the future? So I'm going to talk about 2 specific examples, but how many are familiar with the Joint Terminal Attack Controller close air support training? Couple. So I got the videos just to highlight, though, sort of the complexity of this, of what they do today and how they go out to actually perform it. So they're out in the real environment. This should be able to play the video. There we go.
Target
sound.
number, Echo, Alpha Fox 4000, 1 round, break, direction 5050.
Roger. What was that OT that you sent?
OT direction, so that's our direction, OT, observer to target direction.
You see, entering a lot of information, communication. Jennifer talked about that a little bit, about the importance on that, going back and forth. Also opportunities for why they're waiting for aircraft to come onto station. For being able to provide that effects. Right, downrange. So what they need to see, and again, back to the whole notion of actionable feedback relative to what you're trying to do. Part of the component that I like too with some of these technologies, as you're going out to showcase those things and the effects, it starts talking through different situations and scenarios in ways that you can't always do directly with real assets. And it creates really the opportunities for them to think through different constraints and situations, also in a way that they're not constrained with the current safety, right, limitations of the ranges and what they may be able to do and whether or not they have assets. So the other thing is, as they're doing this, they're only going to get a limited number of opportunities if they have aircraft on station or other things are going on to conduct that training. You have an ability now with some of these technologies that you can continue to do those repetitions even while they're waiting. So even if they're going out there and you're doing a live exercise with live munitions, while they're waiting for those things to come right on station, go out and do like on the line practices in preparation for it. When you're back in a schoolhouse, right, and you want to prepare to actually the range you're going out, why not have already built that environment, put it in on a desktop or a virtual reality to see that in preparation before you even step to it for the first time? Why not take some of those components for what we just now do live and think about how we break those items apart? So we've done that with a couple of different items. The first one I'll talk about, because it's probably the most recent success that we've had, is the Joint Terminal Attack Controller Virtual Trainer, JVT. The big kind of success that we recently had is there is an overarching agreement across all of the service as it relates to this specific position, right, for the skills that they need in order to conduct their assets, right? And for simulators to be used of it, there are specific things that have to be done and evaluation done as part of that. From our side, we've recently just got accredited. The Marine Corps endorsed, pushed over to J6, the Joint Services, who do their accreditations for the simulators for JTACs, and we got interim accreditations for that. Why is that important? Because now, outside of a dome-based facility that you have to go to, this gives you a deployable capability that you can train whenever you want, and you'll get the credits that you need to be able to maintain proficiency. So this is the first time, or at least on the Marine Corps side, that it gives you that capability to not have to go to a dome fixed-base site. One of the things that I was thinking about on the floor recently is, as we go walking around, right, and virtual reality and other technologies, how much do we really need domes? And what do we need them for? And if we come back in 10 years, are we still going to be showcasing domes or projectors? I'm not saying, I think there may be utility depending on the task that you're trying to do. But it is interesting to see how that may shape based off of the technologies and where we go and where we see some of these capabilities being able to provide benefit. Because why would I need a 180 degree, 360 degree dome fixed site if I can put on a head-mounted display and be able to achieve that same level of immersion, right? And there are same challenges as it relates to being able to like the pilots, being able to get the training and proficiencies needed with J-checks when you don't have aircraft on station all the time, and the costs that are associated. This gives you a viable other way and option to do that. So here's a short video just to showcase. I don't know if I hit it. Oh, can we go back, please? Too excited. To showcase some of what the JTAC Virtual Trainer looks like. It's all deployable in a Pelican case. If you're also interested in seeing it, we have it downstairs on the Navy booth, right, 349, where you can go down and actually put it on to get the level of immersion. We have all of their real equipment digitized, so you can go in and do that within the virtual reality context to put it on. It's run by an instructor station, and you can see the individual using the wands and with donning the HMD, and they can run through. We also have 3D props. So the expense that you would have and the availability of some of the actual real tactical gear that they're using, we can pull into it, but you can also create, right, 3D printed props to give them the same type of motor muscle movements they get with their actual gear, depending on how you would want to use it. Maybe if you're looking just purely on communications, you don't need to use some of those props or other elements. If you're working on that with, say, aircraft pilots, maybe there's specific ways that you're using that technology. Part of it, again, is how do you create what's needed from the training context to enable the training objectives and learning objectives outcomes that you want. I think through this journey from my side, that work with XR and the components has shown me opportunities for how you break that down. All of this initial, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, the ability to create that environment and content it was built on some of the stuff that we did with augmented reality. And again, we can continue to reuse that in a lot of different ways, I think also for operational context. So here is the warfighter augmented reality. So this is something, again, when I first stepped into the job, one of the first projects that I got familiar with. It's come a long way from it, and we're now working on a tactical application. But this allows you to go out into the real environment to be able to see the effects that I was talking about earlier, and ranges in areas that are of interest, or to take it even outside your barracks and be able to showcase it. What you don't see, and I don't have in the video, is that you have to know that environment in order to place down objects correctly, right? And that's also a big deal. If you put them down wrong and they're moving around, it's going to lose the experience, the behavioral realism, and folks are going to get frustrated. But a lot of that same content pipeline that you need to be able to create and support virtual reality, you need directly to be able to support augmented reality technologies. It's an underpinning. And so there's good leverages where you can pull those back and forth. But what we've been able to do within our warfighter augmented reality effect is you be able to display specific information, right, that is relevant from, say, a tactical perspective, be able to give that to them in a heads up. If you remember the video back, a lot of the times they're looking down at their tablet or other devices. Instead of being heads up, they're heads down trying to pull information, but being able to provide it there rapidly right now. Another big thing that's always hard is being able to identify an aircraft coming over, right? Because if you're in a bright daylight conditions, small dot far away, it is not a directly easy thing to do, and it's hard to train. Now, you can have both the context of a training aid, helping them better orient and identify where that is, as well as a decision aid in a real environment so that you can show them to be able to highlight it coming in faster so they can orient and acquire that earlier on. This is some of the tactical work that we're being able to try to go to help facilitate this. There are some interesting balancing premises, I think, between how do we minimize clutter, but also give the right information of what's needed and the convenience of what we need to be able to do to support our task and operations. So we're starting to really kind of push in that tactical perspective to help support some of the Marine Corps requirements and the directions that we're going. But I'll say all of this has been built. I find the training environment is a great opportunity to go out and test these concepts. Everybody may want to look at an operational perspective, but being able to engage with those units as they're starting pre-deployment is very hard. The training pipelines have set, right, courses and things that they're working for, known somewhat schedules. They may not have white space always available, but there's a consistency and there's that throughput in a good way that, to me, offer up a unique opportunity to go out and expose these types of technologies as part of it and to get feedback to help better understand where they see the training value, not to say here's a technology and how I think you should use it, but be able to have that conversation. So I'll end just on where I see some of the challenges. The first thing, those that have interacted with me know this, is content is king. You can tell me you have a HoloLens, but that's akin to saying you have a weapon with no munition, right? Like, if you have a device but have no content and no easy way, how are you paying and who is providing that? And so you have to think about that. So that whole, like, I guess on your side, left-hand side, right, is all about how do we generate the content for me in an automated fashion, because the Marine Corps really does not have the personnel and manpower and money to go out and have individuals building these things all the time. It becomes a secondary sort of task for instructors, right? Outside of building PowerPoints, how would I actually integrate this and how do I curate that? So it has to be done in a very seamless manner and set up. And there's a lot to how you generate content. And I'm really just focused on that synthetic environment. But going back to the applications, if you take iPhone and learning technologies, there's a whole set of other different types of enabling content that you have to figure out how to curate, procure, where is it coming from, who's generating it. Like, those are all very serious challenges that will, I think, either inhibit or enable our ability to get to the application, which is those devices and other enablers on the side for how they would be used, right, in the context of it. I would also say we're challenged on the military side from the storage and distribution. You can go out right now, Turbo Squid, how many folks are familiar, early adopters, a few, and go to like repositories for that? Do we really have that within the context of the DoD? How many different platforms are we sharing? What are ways that we can do that better is another side that I see opportunity to kind of be able to work towards that. And then the final component, as I said, from the beginning, when you come into it, it's not just the technology. We're trying to enable training to a learning goal in order to make sure that we can continue to have an unparalleled match, right, at least as it relates to our personnel versus our adversaries. In order to do that, we have to have data and information to inform how well we're doing that. The analytics is something I think we're only starting to tap. There's certainly, I see a lot of good benefit that's coming about on how we do that, but this also offers an opportunity within that context that now we're creating an environment. It's all simulated. We don't have to get on real systems as much. We should be able to, if we're thinking about it, figure out how to pull out those details and information. And that's the thing that's most important, going back to the action. If we're just giving them a tool and they see effects, but they're not really understanding how it's important in the context of their jobs and skills, then we're missing an opportunity. And that's the most important thing that we bring back to them, their ability to improve what they're doing so that they can help continue to make us safe and protect us as part of it. Appreciate your time today, and thank you for the invitation. And I'll be around for any questions after.
Thank you, Dr. Squire. Another round of applause. Awesome, awesome. Very exciting work in the area of human performance development and training in the Navy context. We wanted to have an opportunity to talk about things from multiple perspectives, so I'm happy to introduce a tag team that's going to talk from another perspective. Want to just give you a little bit of a logistical thing. We do have tickets at the end. If you want to come to the social, we invite you to come to that. We will have an opportunity for you to engage with these dynamic speakers at that time. If we have a little bit of time today, I'll try to see if I can pivot and get some questions in, but do stick around, get your ticket so that you can come to the social and discuss in more detail some of the exciting things that are going on. So I want to talk from a different context now. So we've talked about some complex decision-making situations. This is medical, which is another opportunity for us to advance and utilize these technologies and really see the potential that can be achieved. We have tag team here, Mr. Ruben Garza, Mr. Joe Ruisi. Ruben Garza is the chief of the Defense Medical Modeling and Simulation Office. It is the Defense Health Agency J7 Education and Training Directorate, Medical Modernization and Simulation Division. From 2009 to 2015, he helped to stand up the Air Force Medical Modeling and Simulation Program, and then hired by DHA in 2015 to stand up a military health system centralized office. He is bringing support to military medical facilities, both clinical and readiness with simulation technology support. Mr. Joe Ruisi is the Deputy Chief Administrator, Medical Modernization Division, Air Force Medical Modeling Simulation Training Program, Headquarters AETC Surgeon General's Office. In this position, he oversees plans and programs. He advocates for and he executes program initiatives to advance AETC and Air Force medical future technology capabilities. He's been in modeling and sim over 10 years, and he is providing strategic direction to policy, standards, curriculum, equipment validation, medical education, and simulation training in venues that include home station care, medical readiness, and battle trauma management. Let's welcome them to the stage to talk about XR perspectives from the medical training perspective. Who's gonna own?
Okay. Oh, it's on? All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Great speakers before us. Can we give them another round of applause? That was awesome. We're going to be tag teaming, and we're, like Jennifer said, from the medical perspective side of the house. We've heard on the Air Force side, on the Navy side, the Marine side, and the Army side. You've been to the hall and seen a lot of great stuff that's out there for modeling and simulation. We put the other M in there, the medical side of the house. In our side, we have actually piggybacked on what modeling and simulation has done for years, decades. On the medical side, I can go back as far as maybe 15 years from now, 20 years from now. We were more in touch with hands-on for our surgical team, for our nurses, for our technicians. How do we get them ready for any individual that gets injured and they can provide that care, and then move them to the next level of care, and then move them back to the next level, maybe bring them back to the CONA side, and then we can really fix whatever the issues that they have, and then maybe have them back into the front line or keep them back and rehab them. So our perspective has always been on the medical side is having those human patient simulators, having those low task, arm, legs, whatever we need to do that critical task trainer or that decision making of how we're going to stop the bleeding, how we're going to move and patch the person or the simulator, and then pretend that it's a patient. So when we go out there, our staff can do that. Again, hands-on. That's always has been the primary, going back 15 years, maybe even 10 years from now. But something changed because we do use a lot of live tissue, and you heard that across the board, and cadavers. How do we move away from that? Because Congress and other organizations have asked us on the medical side, hey, have you considered other training modalities other than using live tissue or cadaver? So we have moved more into the human patient, the synthetic, the humanoid that you see out there. If you go to the hall, there's a couple medical locations in there that'll show you amputated mannequin, the legs move, it bleeds, it does this, it gives you responses. Great, that's awesome. But what we have also been told is, can you move into mass production? Because we heard Dan talk about those planes that we can't get fast enough. We're minimizing the footprint. How do we, in the medical side, maximize what we have with what the equipment that we have? Because it's becoming more and more prevalent across the board that we need more trainers out there. Can we afford that? Can we move forward on that and spend all that money on the resources? That's where XR, augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality is coming on board. I would say the last 5-6 years, we have seen great strides in whatever the line side, Air Force, Army, Navy is using, bringing it over to our medical side so we can start utilizing that. And we're going to give you some pointers as to how we're moving, progressing. We, as our centralized office, again, I started in the Air Force simulation program 2009. I passed the keys over to Joe in about 2015. He's and I worked together with the Navy. We worked together with Marine Corps, SOCOM, Special Ops, other organizations that do medical modeling simulation. How do we learn from each other? How we work together? How we collaborate and pass information? Because that's the way of the future. How we're working more as a joint environment other than Air Force does it this way, Navy does it this way, Army, no. How do we do that together? Because we are being deployed in joint billets. Air Force with Navy, Navy with the Army, and so forth. How do we know what to do with each other? How do we know when somebody gets injured at the point of injury? How do we move forward, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, but yet I'm working with an Air Force person, technician or a doc from the Navy. How do we move that individual so they can survive? Because that's going to be have 100% survivability. How do we get to that point? Not there yet. We're very close. Our technologies are getting there, and we'll show you how XR and the Metaverse is going to help us through that. I know we got a couple of slides. Let me pass it over to Joe, tell you a little bit of what we're doing, what we have in line, and how we're looking into the future.
Yes, thank you, Ruben. So just to touch on a few points that Ruben brought up, we all bleed the same, in the services. So making sure we kind of stop that bleeding. We want to reduce that as much as we can on the battlefield, and some of the ways we've done that with some of the technologies that you'll see up here on the screen. Just a few pointers using XR, using AR, and then some VR is really how we're trying to tackle that more. With the medical, it's a little bit different. We have to use our hands. The systems that we're working with, the human patient systems, are very complex, and they're all different. To come up with a mannequin or a figure that will replicate human physiology is becoming, it's tough, but it's becoming a little bit easier as we get more into the virtual space, because there's a lot more flexibility. And you'll see, we have the augmented reality where we're training our CCAT teams that are in the air and have complex patients that they don't normally see on everyday, in their everyday job. So having the complexity in a virtual environment really sets, the tone for them to, be able to get that hand memory, muscle movement, and the training that they need for that. Haptics would be a really great thing for us in the virtual environment, both augmented and VR. We have very finite things that we need to do, punching needles, sewing sutures and whatnot. Right now, the haptics aren't there for what we need as medical med techs in the virtual space. But going out on the floor this week, I've seen a lot more vast improvements, and they're getting there. Again, like Ruben said, following on the coattails of the line side and the flight sims, we've taken a lot of their best practices and their successes and tried to make some of our own utilizing that, and getting into the haptics is one of them. We've been working with a lot of different vendors and whatnot to get research out there to advance these technologies, and I think we're getting there. We're getting there fast, which is going to be very helpful. Yeah, Ruben.
So to add to what Joe, now, and I'm going to go Major Johnson because he hit it on the point. What about our young individuals that are coming in, not only to the Air Force, Army, Navy, on the line side, doing some great things, but on the medical side? Well, there's a campus at San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston, called METC, Medical Education Training Campus. We probably have, in any given day, 6,000 to 7,000 students going through an array of enlisted training. Surgical, dental, you got laboratory, radiology, and so forth. The way we're utilizing that training there and going to what Major Johnson said, how do we keep those new folks coming in? Because they're expecting not PowerPoint. They're not expecting open a book and read. They're expecting some high technology. Maybe can I get some realities in there? Because I did that when I was at home before I joined the Air Force, before I joined the Navy, before I joined the Army. And we're coming and we're like, okay, let's show you a PowerPoint, click, and that's the way we're teaching them right now. That is not the way to get them going. And then what happens? They go to the first assignment and they probably have some medical that we probably provided, augmented reality, virtual reality, and they go, how come I didn't get that when I was at the training education campus? So we're helping METC try to get to that level, and Joe is going to give you an explanation of one of the courses that we piloted, put a prototype in there because we're looking at those young individuals and the way they're coming in, and they're starting early. I know my kids, when they were young, they wanted already this game so they can get into it and so forth. And when I was telling them, hey, I'm teaching students and this is what I'm teaching them with a PowerPoint, I got to change the slides. They're like, Dad, really? Is that the way you're teaching them? Well, that's the only thing we have right now. I wish we had more. We're getting to that point. And one of the big things is coming to ITSEC, other conferences that are providing, because I can see a lot of, and I'm working with a lot of industry partners, as you're coming up with our needed gaps, our requirements to get what we need to that point so we can help the young individual coming in to the military and then move into those levels and go to the next facility, so that when they go to MacDill Air Force Base and then they go to another facility, that they have the same training. They don't go backwards to, oh, we only have this arm that you can train on, and maybe we need to send you to travel to go to MacDill so you can get that training again. That is not going to be the way of the future, not the way we're looking at it from our perspective at our central office. But I'll pass it to Joe to give you a little indication of what we're moving forward at the METC campus.
Yeah, so one of the successes that we have with the METC campus is our BMETs, our biomedical equipment repair technicians. They fix all the pieces of equipment in the hospital. Some of it, when you're in the deployed location, are very large, very expensive to have, and it can't be sent everywhere. So building that training in the environment where they can manipulate and do the trainings that they need to do has made it, a very cost-effective and training effectively with the virtual environment. You can see that on the bottom where they're manipulating what is called the eDocs. This is a piece of equipment that makes oxygen, clean oxygen, medical grade oxygen for when you're in a deployed environment. One of the very critical tasks critical pieces of equipment that's needed when you're in a deployed location and you're getting fixed per se in one of these deployed hospitals. So again, a very vital piece of equipment that's very low in equipment numbers, that can't be pushed everywhere to where everybody, all these BMETs can train on it. We were able to replicate that and put it into VR, and now the success rates and everybody who needs those trainings can get it virtually. We don't have to send money for travel. We don't have to send them out to to these locations where these specific pieces of equipment are, but we can do that all virtually. And it's been one of the successes with there. And since but 2 or 3 years ago, it has gone viral in there, and all the other courses are starting to say, hey, how can we have something like that? And again, just building those environments for these students and the kids that are coming in is great. Another one probably see on there is the AugMed, where big thing is having everybody be some level of a medic, so that your battle buddy, the person next to you, if anything happens to them, they can immediately do some kind of intervention to help save their lives. TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and having those steps just ingrained in their memory, and building in kind of like a gamification of that training, so where the students are sitting in the dorm, they're playing on their phone anyway, they can learn what they need to do the next day in course in their class and be prepared for what's the next thing to come.
Yeah, and that ties into what I started saying at the beginning, joint training, getting all those entities together, all those organizations. And Dan hit it correct. Live virtual constructive gaming is the other one that we've been looking at, because we want them to start getting those training modalities, go across the board, not only in one facility, but go across. The other one that we're working on, and I know we have a couple of industry partners, is how do we tie an Air Force surgical doctor with a nurse that's across maybe in Germany and a technician over on the Pacific side in Yokota Air Base, and work them together on this training exercise. From the point of injury that we get an individual and move them to the echelons of care. So those are the things. We've got a couple efforts that we've done, but that is just one modality. But we want to start with the XR and then still continue with the hands-on, because repetition is one thing that we need for a provider. You can only do so much virtual reality, but how do we get in there and evaluate with the hands-on? And again, as we minimize the live tissue training, the cadaver usage, use of mannequins, augment with this XR and the meta version, that's what the future is. And I'm so excited to be, I know I was at ITSEC, we did a couple of virtual ones because of the COVID, being in person and seeing everything live and how things have progressed, I would say within the last 3 years, like Joe said, and moving forward to that, where the point is. Please talk to us at that social. We can answer any questions, but also give you an indication of where the military health system across 400 facilities, maybe a third of them are large medical centers. That's where we have most of our surgeons, most of our nurses, technicians, administrative people that we are trying to support, so that way whether they're in a medical large facility and they get those training, and then they go to a smaller facility that has a little bit less, but we can augment by using some of this metaverse. And that's the future of the military health system that we're looking for.
Yeah, let's see what's on the next slide.
Oh,
Was there another one?
I think we have the last slide. Yep.
That was it? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, just to recap again, we're big advocates for all these XR trainings, whether it's VR to AR. I personally agree with the previous presenters where AR is the next best thing. That's where we should go. More so with the medical, because we have to use our hands a lot, and until the haptics and all that catch up, the finite skills that we need, the muscle memory that we need as medics, we can benefit a lot from AR training in that regard, and content. I believe the content is huge as well. There is a plethora of vendors out there doing stuff for the line side and the mechanics and stuff. We need more content. We need as much content as we can when it comes to the medical scenarios out there to get our docs, medics, and techs trained up in all of this. So
That's correct. So with that, we'll leave you with just this thought. For us on the medical side, we do need your help. Industry partners, we do research. I know we look at ONR, AFRL, other organizations, and then we come here to this conferences to see what the line is doing from modeling simulation that we in the medical can bring into our enterprise and utilize, maybe adjust it a little bit to fit our training gaps, our requirements. But please, the future looks great for our side. We're progressing as we go through this. We have great individuals on the medical force that can provide life-sustaining preventions, so that way we can get the warfighter back to where they have to be and provide support, or back home and have them have a productive life after that. So we in the medical field have great confidence that the future is going to look good, especially as we move into the XR and the Metaverse. Well, with that, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll be at the social to answer any questions you might have.
yeah.
Thank you. One last round of applause. I don't know if he's still here. Mr. Robinson, great opener. Major Johnson, bringing it up. Dr. Squire, Mr. Ruben Garza, Mr. Joe Ruisi. We appreciate them for all that they have presented to us, but all they're doing within the community to advance not just modeling simulation, but synthetic training, and how we're going to utilize these technologies to actually realize some change and operational impact. Just before we close, real quick, I think someone's in the back. The lights are pretty bright. I cannot see if anybody is back there, but we should have someone with tickets. The tickets are for you to come to the social. We do want to see you, to have an opportunity for you to engage with our dynamic speakers, ask any questions that you might have. I think we have 2 people that are handing out tickets. And I do want to take one last opportunity to thank our sponsors again. Round of applause for our sponsors for helping us to put together these next big things. I also want to thank Bob and Juliana for all that they're doing to help us to organize and get things together. We thank you for your attendance and appreciate you hanging out with us for a little while. Thanks.